Mm. Welcome, everyone. Hello, Support Kings. We're here from supportintimacy.com, where I help high achieving adults find sustainable inner peace and to learn new skills to gain more confidence and self esteem in the realms of emotional intimacy. And before I dive into our topic of the day and introduce our very special guest, I just want to take a moment and invite you over to my free Facebook group called Intimacy Hub. Some of you might be there right now listening to our conversation today. But in this group, I go live weekly with various trainings and content all around creating more emotional intimacy in your life, having greater skills for deeper connection, whether that's with your family, your partners, your children, or even your colleagues. So now I'm really excited to dive in today because the topic at hand is very personal to me this 2020, with being a part of my mom's final days on this planet in her body. So I wanted to start a mini series, and the mini series is, living consciously, dying consciously, and talking about end of life intimacy. And is that even possible? So our very special guest today is Anne Marie, and her work is inspired by her ancestral research in her Irish, Celtic, Finnish, Sami, Indigenous. I'm probably totally mispronouncing all of this, and I do, I do apologize. Her roots, which shows up in all her writing, and I'm excited for her to talk about her books because I know one of her books is what inspired me a couple years back. She draws from her work as a death doula, a nurse assistant, meditation instructor, and Reiki master teacher and mother of three. She lives in the Northeast Kingdom of Vermont, where she practices magic, trains her Siberian Huskies. I love that. And delights in her family's love. Now, she is also an author. She's an author of the independent publisher book award winning book called Death Nesting. And this is what actually inspired me to reach out originally to Anne Marie. It's called Death Nesting, Ancient and Modern Death Doula Techniques, Mindfulness Practices, and Herbal Care. As well, what I've just learned most recently, I was unaware of this, is a young adult book called The Death of Can you say that, Anne-Marie, for me?
Faith folk, the death of faith folk.
Thank you, faith folk. My tongue is twisted today. We had so much technical challenges. And so without further ado, with all of that being said, I just want to hand it over to you, Anne-Marie, to share with us more about you.
More about me.
I know. What a way to kick things off. I know. Open question there. Just share what comes to you right now about what inspires you in life right now.
Yeah, my greatest inspiration right now is trying to get people to love themselves as deeply as possible. It's quite a challenge because I think a lot of people don't have a lot of self-love. And then, of course, that comes out in all kinds of ways that we don't intend. And we end up hurting each other and hurting ourselves even more. But from working with people who are dying, and even people who are not actively dying, but talking about their future death, I just find that a lot of them have so much guilt and a lot of guilt and regrets and fear and mistrust. And so a lot of what I try to do when I'm working with people is just to try to get them to love themselves through all of their mistakes and through the dark, sticky places, and to just find some peace in themselves where it's okay. It's okay, so that when they're having their last breath, they can feel it's okay. So that's my biggest inspiration right now, is to try to get people to even think about where that place in them might exist.
Yeah. Wow. So beautiful. And thank you for the work that you're doing and the loving that you're doing, and just listening to you speak. It's medicine to my ears and my hearts. Yeah. So I recall when my mom passed this year, is that sensation that went through me, or that awareness, is just like, I want to make sure without a doubt that she knows that she is loved, and that she knows or feels that she's not alone.
Mhm.
Because something, while my mother and I never really talked much about preparing for death, which is something I'd love to hear from you in a moment on, is when it came to her final days and those conversations opened, she did mention in roundabout ways in conversations that she was scared of dying alone. And I want to ask you, like, how common is that? Do you find the fear of dying alone, or not feeling loved and feeling more stressed at the time of dying?
Yeah, having not consciously been there myself just yet, it's kind of hard to know what it's like when you're actively dying, right? So I have had, other people have had near death experiences. And so you can kind of catch glimpses of what that might be like. And I know people have gone, further than I have in their near death experience. And so it's hard to understand what that might feel like in that moment without having been there. All of us just talk about death and dying as best we can without knowing. Um, but do we ever die alone? Ever? Really? Like, so this is a challenge right now for people have always died alone all around the planet since the beginning of time. People have died alone on the side of the road, um, in a war, a refugee, in their own home. So people have always died alone, but it's actually in the forefront right now with COVID deaths, because loved ones are in the hospital and their family members are unable to be with them. And their biggest fear, our biggest fear, is them dying alone. But I don't think we ever die alone. Our our ancestors come, our people come for us, and time again, I don't have to make that up. Time and time again, they appear in the death room, and the person who is dying says, "Oh, my mother is here," or whoever it happens to be. That can't be made up. When it's so commonplace that people who work with the dying know that their loved ones show up for them. So I don't think that we're ever dying alone, but it might feel like we're alone, which is why I talk about like that place. I call it like secret nesting that we have to do. We have to find that very secret place that only we know, that only we can touch. That's a comfortable place of love and understanding that we're not alone. We are safe. We have to trust. But getting that to be common knowledge, if we're only looking toward the outside, and if we're just seeking visually our people around us in the room with us holding our hand, well, then that's very scary. If that's the only thing that we're accustomed to understanding as being in the presence of others. So when we let our conceptual mind relax and think, or just feel what else could be out there, we're not alone. I don't think.
It brings to mind a few things. I remember when my mom started experiencing different realities as the veil thinned and she became closer and closer. Uncle Leo kept coming in, and it was someone that she kept bringing up, right? And so that just came to mind when you were speaking of that. I'm like, oh yeah, Uncle Leo was with her. He had passed a month earlier, I believe. So I found that to be fascinating. Something that stuck with me, and I I believe I read it in your book, was, the death nesting, how we prepare for newborn to come into this world, and how equally important it is to create that nest for those who are leaving this particular world. Would you share more about that?
Mhm. Yeah, it's easy for us to talk about babies coming into the world because it's full of joy and full of hope and full of the future. And so, of course, we want to create a sacred space for this beautiful new life to emerge. And it fills all of us with a sense of comfort and joy and known, like the known. There will be a physical baby. And of course, there's lots of times when, great heartache when there's a miscarriage or a stillbirth. So, you know, that's when everybody's hopes have been up so high and then they come crashing down, which is exceptionally painful. But we do create these sacred spaces. We prepare and we have things that we get. So we get a changing table and we get a crib and we get clothes. And so you can see things accumulating that will surround the new baby, the new being. But when somebody is dying, what can you bring them? So you're already at a loss where you may bring them a bouquet of flowers. That's nice. You may bring them a soft blanket. That's nice. But these are not things that they're going to take with them. They're not things that the one who's dying is going to be able to enjoy. And or maybe they can enjoy it in the moment, but it's not long lasting. And there is no sense of hope and future. And so I think people tend to not want to create the same amount of sacred space around that event as they do with a newborn baby. And that's so sad because it's absolutely a sacred event, but it's a sacred event involving the unknown. And there's nothing tangible that we can touch and work with and see out into the future with. It's an ending as far as we can see and understand. And we don't do well with that. We don't do well with the unknown as humans. Even when we are feeling unwell and there's something wrong with our body, we want to know what it is that's wrong, and it makes it easier to deal with. But just having an anonymous something that you can't name or pinpoint is very uncomfortable. And I think that triggers all that same feeling within us when somebody's dying. It's the unknown.
Yeah. Yeah. And what can we do with that, right? I think we're all facing that this year, especially all the nervousness that comes up when we can't do anything solid with it. Yeah. So, I, for my experience with dying, on my journey with my mom, what I remember is how absolutely present it brought me. Like, it just, like, I was solid, rock solid there and nothing else. The unknown for me, and this was just my own unique experience, is nothing else mattered. And in the most simplest of human moments of changing her diapers. And I'm sharing that because, like, I would have never even had a thought, in all honesty, if I'm radically honest here, of taking care of my mom in that way. It never even crossed my mind. But it was such a radical, maybe shock. There's something that about it that was shocking, but so graceful that it just, I was there no matter what. There was not second guessing anything. There was just, how could I be there for her journey? But then the interesting part, like when I started to think about intimacy, and it also is something I read in your book, was how to create the space to the best of my ability that I felt would nurture her. And also, where was it my stuff that was coming up to like interfering with her own dying process? Because I could think I'm being as caring as possible. But you mentioned somewhere in your book, like if people are used to having the TV on loud, turn the TV on loud. And to me, that would be the worst thing. I'm like, that's not a sacred space. Right. So it was a constant reflection of, okay, so where is it my stuff? Where am I putting my agenda on my mom's dying experience? And where can I just be? Yeah. So any thoughts on that, about where we overstep, with the best of intentions in the dying process?
Oh yeah, we're really imperfect beings, and we're gonna mess it up. The we'll try as best as we can, and then end up feeling ashamed, or heartbroken, or we get consumed by our own feelings, and then forget, like, oh wait, this isn't about me. But if you pay attention during life on a daily basis, those are things that we have to remind ourselves about all the time anyway. Like, oh, right, maybe this situation is not all about me. And it's no different in the dying process. But if nobody has ever thought about this before, if they've never contemplated their own mortality or their loved ones' mortalities, they can be completely taken off guard, and all of a sudden they're asked to make decisions, or a lot depends on the manner of the death, whether it was sudden or whether it was a slower illness or a slow decline. And so you have time to kind of process what's going on. There's no room to process when there's a sudden death. You just kind of kick into automatic. And because none of the means of our deaths are certain, we don't know how we're going to die. I think that it's helpful to talk about death and dying in advance of our own deaths, or in advance of our loved ones' deaths, so that we get used to at least the concept that someone's going to die first. Is it going to be me? Is it going to be you? Somebody's going to die first. And if you just think about the loss, feel the potential, the future loss, or maybe you'll die before them. But it's referred to as like a pre-grieving, where you kind of go through the emotions ahead of time, and you're like, oh, that's really painful. That's going to hurt because whatever it happens to be. And, it's not always the deaths of your closest loved ones that you feel so deeply. It can be your ex-partner that you're not even on good terms with anymore. And then all of a sudden you're just struck and you feel like, oh my God, how could this have happened? So going through that kind of pre-grieving with each person that you have had in your life, you can find the tender places and then maybe do something about it ahead of time, or not. But at least that that's a tender spot. Like, oh, that's going to hurt. I still don't want to apologize, or I still don't want to make peace with that person. But when that happens, that's going to be painful. So I really like, the experience that you had with your mother from a distance. I was, following some of this, and you're such an intimate person anyway. I can't wait to read your books. I'm sorry. I regret I have not read them yet, but the fact that you could find such loving intimacy in a dying process, and that your mother could meet you there, to me, I think it's one of the greatest blessings you could have on this planet. And if only everybody could have that with their mother. If only everybody could have that, even if it's not your birth mother, whoever represented your greatest caregiver, to be able to share that and have it reciprocated is really beautiful.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. And it is as well my wish for every human on this planet is to have that, because I felt it was a gift and it was rare, um, and there is encouragement there for people that I want to put out to tap onto, add onto your grief sharing, is to feel, to do what your personal processes are, to become comfortable with feeling. Um, I know I have this saying that I'd rather feel everything than nothing at all. And that was birthed out of my own, crisis over 25 years ago, right? Because I wasn't feeling. And I also acknowledge how feeling is scary. It can feel uncomfortable, it can feel all consuming. But I have found, at least for me and my practices, is the more like doing these practices that you talked about, like imagining the death or living without somebody, or um, or the greatest pleasure. Pleasure can be as hard to be with as the pain and the suffering and the grief for some people. And I actually just wrote a grief ceremony a couple weeks ago. I'll share it with you. I was like really excited. I was like, oh yeah, how do I process being with grief? And so yeah, it's just what's coming to mind right now is just think about ahead of time how you can create that closeness, like no matter where you are in your life. I know, I want to share when I was introduced to your book, Anne Marie. I think it was 2 years, maybe 3 years now. My mom had a stroke.
No,
Yeah,
when
no,
1 year ago I read the book.
that's when it came out. Well, I got it then as soon as it came out. Wow, only 1 year. So I did get it instantly. A mutual friend, suggested it. My mother had a stroke,
Mhm.
and that was like, "Oh, wow, it could happen." And I was just like, "How can I prepare?" And then I read some material from other mutual friends of ours, and I'm just like, "Oh, I'm going to every day when I see my mother, when I visit her, is invite in something that brings closeness, that maybe provokes an experience where she's reflecting on her life." And so on Mother's Day this year, 2020, because she passed in July, um, I sat at her house and went through all her photo albums from when she was a baby till my childhood. And I was blown away because she remembered everything. And she's like, that's so and so, that's so and so. And I'm so grateful that I did that. And we had that moment for her to actually have a sort of ritual to reflect on and inspire some of her old memories, which led into further conversations of stuff she's never talked to me about before. And so I'm sharing that story because to do these things could be rituals of sense that aren't even intentional, but are helping our loved ones um, as they slowly maybe make their way to life transition. Um, so, do you have any special rituals or things to add to that for people to maybe intentionally or unintentionally bring to their families and loved ones?
Yes, but what you just said is really beautiful. So going through old photo albums, when people are aging, um, even if they have memory loss, there's maybe certain parts that are still fully intact. So they might be able to recall their childhood very clearly, but they have no idea what they had for breakfast. So, I mean, a lot of us don't remember what we had for breakfast. But so I call that sometimes when people are, um, when they're dying, when they're starting to get confused, whether you can participate with them or not, I call it pulling together a timeline where you take certain events, and you can do this with a photo album with them if you're able to, or if you're not able to, sometimes there's a great distance, or there's communication problems, or other things that have separated you. Let's say your dear friend or your parent is dying, but there's too much tension between you, and so you can't be there. That happens too, but you still have compassion for them, you still love them. They're confused. So you can sit in meditation and start pulling together a timeline. So anything that you recall from their earliest memory. So grab the day that they were born. Maybe you know the date and the time, and you pull it down. And then grab their next memory. You know that they lived in California. You know that they moved to New York. And pull it all together to try and create a timeline. And it doesn't have to be like a timeline from beginning to end, which is how we all think about it, but like create some kind of a completion where you're pulling all of these things down. And I believe that energetically that can help them make sense of their time on the planet and that it's wrapping up. So doing that in person with them is a beautiful activity. That would be first and foremost, right? Because then you get the funny parts too. And we have to remember that if you don't have a sense of humor during the dying process, it's going to be so much more difficult. It is not cool sometimes. Like you're wiping body parts that you thought you would never have to wipe on this individual. So pulling that together and creating something for them to carry with them off on their journey, I think can be incredibly helpful. And if you can get those fun parts in there while you do it, well, that's great. And a lot of people want to paint this individual that is dying. What is that? If they had a sick sense of humor, I'll pull that right down and can just who they were as a human. We don't need to deny certain parts of them and say, oh, and I experienced abuse, a person like this. Put together so that even we can't from memories from ours or our view of them. So pull together their timeline, but you're obviously playing a role in this too as you're supporting them. If you can pull in forgiveness, that would be good too.
I love that. I'm just going to type that in because I'm recognizing, that's a good one. Pull in forgiveness. We do have some listeners here, so I just want to take a moment as you speak to just acknowledge them. So we have Colleen Monahan with us, Elizabeth Morgan. I don't know if she's on, if someone but Elizabeth Morgan is here, and they're tuning in, and I'm recognizing the time, and I think I can go on like for hours with this conversation. There's so much to go on in these conversations with you, but I do want to get to. I know you have a training, and I know you support people in learning and cultivating this art of being a death doula. Can you share more about that? Because I really want people to hear this.
Yeah, the death doula training that I do is based on community death care. So there are a lot of organizations that want to support professional death doulas, which is wonderful. We need professional death doulas in workplaces, in residential care and in hospitals and nursing homes, and in individual people's homes as well. But what my inspiration is to train people to be in their communities, to be a source of knowledge for their neighbor, for their family, for their friends, to spread the knowledge that people feel empowered to care for their own dying and to care for their own dead. And even if they can't do it themselves, to have some kind of understanding of what goes on during the dying process. I would love if death education was in our school systems. I think it's as important as sex education, but it's just like people are afraid of, talking about sex and getting pregnant. I think it's the same with death. People are like, "Ooh, better not talk about that." So I do community death care work and encourage people to serve from their heart in their own communities.
Beautiful offering. Can you share before we do wrap up today, because I didn't ask this at the beginning, what inspired you to dive into these realms as a death doula, like to help people in this way?
Um, I I was there are a lot of different things, but the most visible one was that I was coordinating fashion shows and festivals, and I was a music manager, and they brought national acts in from all over the place. And it was so fun, but it always felt so empty. Like over and over again at the end of the night, I was like, now what? Like, I kept trying to plan something bigger and better. And I know that you can relate to this because I listened to a little bit of your past interview. And one night on my way home from this really successful, beautiful fashion show, I ran into a homeless man, and he was 89 years old. And I brought him home with me. It was like 20 degrees outside, and I brought him home with me. I piggybacked him on my back up to my second story apartment, and he carried his catheter with him. He was homeless and just carried his catheter around with him and emptied it. And and that changed everything. So I'd grown up with beautiful things in the past with death, but he's what really launched me into this work. You have little friends there.
I know, I do apologize for that. His name is Pete. The doorbell rang and Pete's like, "Oh, there's humans." Yeah. But I wanted to go back and acknowledge this act of what we started as the act of love and the act of kindness that you showed to this human. And that was the start of the support, right? To start to bring more life into your life, right? Hearing the emptiness prior to that and just your awareness to bring that into your life. And yeah, is there anything else that you want to say to us as we close our conversation today? And I'm thinking we need to have a part two because I feel we're just getting started.
You know what? I will be so happy to talk to you anytime. Support, you're so sweet. Does anybody tell you that? People must tell you that all the time.
It depends what day you get me on. No.
Good. I'm glad. I'm glad there's another side too. No, I would be so happy to talk with you anytime.
Yeah, lovely, lovely. So for those of you listening, for those of you who are going to be tuning into the replays of this, Anne Marie's links, her links to her books and everything are going to be shared in the comments, and they'll continue to be shared so you can tap into her and her books for resources when it comes to creating nests for maybe your loved ones and family members. And I look forward to sharing more next week as we dive into our second session with a very special Tibetan Buddhist who's joining us live, who helped me personally with my mom's passing. But until then, be well.